All right, good morning, everybody. It's so good to have you with me again on the live stream. Whether you're in the United States of America or Canada, South America, Australia, wherever you're at today, it's wonderful to get together and gather around God's Word here at the Digital Cathedral. I kind of like that name, Digital Cathedral. It kind of defines who we are and what we're doing. The cathedral is a gathering place of large numbers of people, and we are totally digital. So we're gathering from all over the world to hear the good news. And I can assure you that if you are with me every Sunday or Wednesday, all you're going to hear is good news. I don't come with bad news. I come with good news. So this morning, I would like to finish up what I started last week. We're doing a three-part series. This is part 2 this morning. And the question or the statement is, are we living in truth or are we living in fact? We looked a little bit last week at what a life looks like that is lived in fact. John said in 3 John verse 4, he said this. He said, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Now that's an amazing statement. I have no greater joy. Can I tell you, I don't have any greater joy than to see the comments and the testimonies and the messages that you send me either on Facebook Messenger or sometimes by email or even on the PayPal when you give me a little message. I have no greater joy than to see that your eyes are opening and you're beginning to walk in this dimension of truth that you've never walked in before. The word truth there is the Greek word aletheia. We defined it last week, but in case you weren't with me, aletheia means absolute, never changing, take it to the bank, it is done kind of truth. Nothing can be stronger than aletheia. The question is, are we walking in truth or are we walking in fact? We talked last week about dealing with the giants of life either from the perspective of fact or from truth. And there's a world of difference between facts and truth. Last Sunday morning, we looked at how it works when you deal with giants if you face them and confront them based on fact. The fact, Webster said, is something that has actual existence. It's a piece of information that is presented as having objective reality. So when we're talking about facts, we're talking about those things that by perception would appear to be absolutely so. They're undisputable, they're facts. We've got the evidence, we've got the data, we've got the experience, it all comes together and that creates what we call facts. And we have giants in our life, and giants can be all kinds of things. They can be habits, they can be attitudes, it can be loneliness, it can be insecurities. All kinds of things rise up in our life like giants and feed us all kinds of data that we believe is so, and creates a perception and a picture in our mind, and that mind then that we've created becomes our reality, and we live out that reality. And so we've created giants, we've empowered giants that have told us the facts, and the facts, however, oftentimes are conflicted with what the truth is. So this giant will stand up and stand between you and what God says you possess, what God says you have, which is the truth, and tells you that you'll never be able to enter in or possess the truth because these facts are overwhelming. It seems like in life, every time we turn around, there's another giant. You know, I'm facing somewhat of a giant in my life right now. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Doesn't really matter because I'm not dealing with it according to fact. I'm dealing with it according to truth. But there's all kinds of giants that rise up. Giants of lack, giants of sickness. I don't have a job. Giant. There's a depression, giant, loneliness, rebellion. Your children are not walking like they ought to. You feel rejection. That can be a giant oftentimes. Giants are enemies. They're enormous in size and they have tremendous strength. They're well fortified. So with all the facts that we can't ignore, last week we looked at dealing with giants on the basis or on the dimension of fact. And we looked at a story from Numbers chapter 13. I want to run over that just real quick and let you see for yourself how it looks when you deal with a giant from fact. Numbers chapter 13, verse 26 to 33, it's a story going into the promised land. And it says in verse 26 that they returned the spies, the 12 spies, one from each tribe, returned and came back to the congregation of Israel and showed them the fruit of the land. the fruit of truth. And they said, man, it really flows with milk and honey. Verse 28, nevertheless, the people that dwell in the land, they're strong. Cities are fortified, they're large. They're descendants of Anak there, they're giants. Then in verse 30, Caleb quiets the people and says, I hear all that, I see all that, I was with you. But listen, let's go up and take it. We're able to overcome. We can do this thing. But verse 31 says, the men that gone up, they said, we're not able to do it. We're not strong enough. We can't overpower these giants. You know, the depression, the insecurity, the habit, whatever the giant, it's just too strong for us. The cities are too well fortified. We're just going to have to forget it. We're going to have to just live on this level of just existing. Now, we read verse 1 and 2 where God had spoke to Moses and said, Moses, the land I'm giving you is called Canaan. It's your land. So that is not a fact. That's a truth. It's the truth that never changes. It's absolute. It never changes. It never increases with more data. Facts are conclusions based on data and experience. Verse 1 and 2, truth never changes. So it was the truth against which we have no empirical reason that can stand against it, that the children of Israel had every right to go in and take the promised land. And it took them all the way over to Joshua chapter 21, but they did possess it. And here's the message in that. Whatever God declares as truth will come about. It will take place. It may take some time. It may take a generation or two to get us there. But whatever God has declared as truth, it will not be denied. It will happen. It will take place. You can take it to the bank. All of the facts that we throw against truth will not be able to stand. The Bible says Jesus came full of grace and truth. He didn't come full of grace and facts. In fact, I told you last week that the word fact never appears in the King James Bible. I think that's highly interesting because we rely so much on facts. The word truth appears 222 times, mainly in the book of Psalms, Old Testament, and New Testament in the book of John. Write this down. Take it into your innermost being. Truth always trumps fact. Truth is not in subjection to facts. Numbers chapter 13 is about allowing fact to rule your perception and create your reality. Now see, most of the church today, or a lot of the church, especially those of us, you know, on the live stream that we gather into the digital cathedral, we come in together. Most of us, we have gotten some revelation. We're seeing things. But the majority of the church is still bowing their knee to the facts of tradition, to the facts of religion, to the facts of doctrine. I'll give you a real good example of truth and fact conflicting. In Hebrews chapter 8, many of us have gotten a revelation of this. It has become truth to us, something that God has spoken directly to us. And it spurs us and drives us on. In verse 11, of Hebrews chapter 8, it says, none of you shall be able to teach his neighbor and brother, saying, know the Lord. You know, evangelize. Give them the 4 spiritual laws. Nobody's going to be able to say that. Listen, for they shall all know me, from the greatest to the least. Is that a fact or is that truth? That, my friend, is truth. And you can just get understanding on this as far as you can get your head around it, that whatever God says is truth, that will come to pass. It will take place. When we read something like Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 11, I don't care what religion comes in. Religion will come with all kinds of facts. The world of religion will come with the fact that everybody is not going to come to know the Lord, but in fact, the religion will say the world is getting worse. There are fewer people coming to know the Lord. In fact, they will tell you it's going to get so bad that in fact we need to be raptured out of here. And so we've done all kinds of manipulations and controlling and tried to get this piece to fit with that piece to make us think that the facts are we're going to be raptured out of this mess. No, that's not the truth. The truth is there's coming a time, and it may take from Numbers chapter 13 to Joshua chapter 21 for the truth to come about and prevail. But what God has proclaimed as truth will take place. It will come about. It will transpire. So that's just one example of how the minority sees the truth. The majority is hinging on facts. And when you explain it to the multitudes, for some crazy reason, it's like Numbers then 14, verse 1 and 2, where the 10 guys are saying, here's the facts. There's giants in the land. The cities are fortified. They're stronger than we are. They tick through all the facts. And Joshua and Caleb says, forget the facts. The truth is we can take it now because God said we could. The majority will believe the facts. And what happens when you allow fact to rule over truth, Numbers chapter 14, verse 1 and 2, you see all of the people crying and lamenting. Man, we wish we had never left Egypt. Isn't it? Take us back to bondage. We wish we had just died in bondage, or at least died in the wilderness. The beast had devoured it. It had been a better fate than what we're going through now. That's amazing how religion is happy to stay in the mess they're at rather than push into the truth that God has promised. The reason we do that is because we've swapped out the tree of life, which is the tree of truth. We have swapped that tree out, which has no limitations, no boundaries. You can stretch it as far as what God said you can go. We've swapped that out for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the tree of fact. It's the tree of reason. It's the tree of what makes sense. Adam swapped out the tree of life for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that entered into the human race. And all of us since that time have been swapping it out. We've been living by fact and reason and logic over what the truth of God says. And now we're getting revelation as to what the truth of God is, that no man will be able to teach his neighbor, that all know the Lord from the greatest to the least. And we present that to the multitude, and the multitude stands up and says, but we've got 10 all-stars, 10 big-name preachers that says it's going to get worse and we need to be raptured. And so we wish we could just get out of here, and they cry and lament and are happy in Egypt when they're not possessing what God said they can possess. So let's deal with these giants now based on truth and not fact. Let's come to a place of higher consciousness. I want to look at the story of David and Goliath because it's a familiar story, and I want you to see it maybe in a little bit different light. We're going to see how perspective and experience, when you walk in truth, makes you fearless against facts and totally dismantles the giant. You can become a fact destroyer with truth, and we're going to see that. So when you set your mind on truth, facts can't sway you. Probably the two biggest giants that people face today are poverty and sickness. And John addressed that in 3 John, 3 John verse 2. He gives us truth. The fact is, a lot of people facing poverty and sickness. Those are the two giants, it seems like, even in the church. 3 John 2 says, brethren, I wish above all things that you would prosper and you would be in health, watch, even as your perception changes, as your reality makes a shift, the place that you're living in becomes different. And John just said, even as your soul prospers. So for us to move into the truth of what God says out of the facts of what it seems like our five senses have picked up on, fed to our brain, created a new perception, a new reality that we now live in and have lived in maybe for generations and generations. Maybe you're poor, your dad was poor, your grandpa was poor, or you're sick, your dad was sick, or whatever the case might be. It's not a generational friggin' curse. It's because we have accepted fact over truth. We've not come to a place where our soul has changed the perception and the reality that we now live in. And maybe you're that transitional generation and you're being pulled two ways. You're still seeing how your family and others have gone through all of this junk and are still attached to it. Yet you're seeing the truth over here and you're drawn to the truth, and yet the facts keep trying to pull you back again. That's a terrible cesspool. Jesus, when he prayed, he said, Father, I pray that your word would sanctify them. Your word is truth. He didn't say your word is fact. He said your word is aletheia. It is undeniable, unbreakable, absolute truth. So giants come to us, and yes, I understand giants come, and they always come with two things. They come with a sword and shield. We'll see that's the way Goliath came. They come with a sword offensively to cut you down, and they come with a shield in defense of anything you would say. Anything that you would try to do. Giants always stand there with a sword and shield. They have an offense and a defense. As soon as you throw truth at a giant, he comes back and holds his shield up and says, yes, but how about? Giant will say, yes, but. A giant will come back with a shield and say, you must first. You've got to become holy enough. You've got to become good enough. You've got to pray enough. You've got to fast enough. You've got to do all this, and then the truth will be for you. No, truth is for you regardless of what facts are. So I want to look at this story of David and Goliath, and this is a powerful story. It's exactly opposite of Numbers 13. Where last week, and if you weren't with me last week, go back and look at the video on YouTube. You can pick it up or come over to my Facebook wall. It'll be there. What we're going to look at with David and Goliath is exactly the opposite. They faced the same giants, the same lineage. The giant that David faced came from the lineage of Anak. And that was the giant those were the giants that were in the promised land in Numbers 13. We're going to see such a contrast of how you can deal with giants in your life. Numbers 13, they came and they said, fact, the cities are strong, they're fortified. Fact, they're stronger than we are. Fact, there's giants in the land. Fact, the ites are covered all over the promised land. Jebusites, the south, Hittites, the north, the otherites along the coast. There's no way. Those guys are ready to defend the land. There's no way with our feeble weapons that we can go in and possess the land. They got spears, they got swords, and all we got is manna pots. We have nothing to be able to offensively, we can't do it. And so even though God gave them truth in the first two verses, that I'm taking responsibility. See, when God speaks truth, He takes responsibility to make the truth come about. He said, I'm giving you the promised land. Therefore, it becomes God's responsibility to put it in their possession if they just walked in empty-handed. The one that promised it has got to be faithful also to bring it to pass. Amen? All right, you still with me? So let's look at this story from 1 Samuel chapter 17. And we're going to look at it. It's entirely opposite of what happened earlier in Numbers chapter 13. All right. 1 Samuel chapter 17. If you have your Bible, grab it real quick off the coffee table or wherever you're at, and let's look at some stuff here together. All right, let me just read to you some stuff. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 21. You know the story. Jesse set David down where his brothers were lined up. They were fighting against the Philistines. Well, the battle hadn't started yet, but they were all standing on opposite sides of the hill with a valley in the middle. Jesse sends David down, says, David, go down, take your brothers some food. See what's going on down there, come back and tell me what's happening. So in verse 21, David gets down there. And in verse 21, it says, the Israelites and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And in verse 22, it says, David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper. He ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. Verse 23, and as he talked with his brothers, there was the champion of the Philistines of Gath, Goliath by name. And he came from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words, so David heard them. This giant came out every day and threatened them and intimidated them. Giants do that. Giants come every day to let you know they're in control, that they're in charge, that you better just cower down, shut your face up, and do what you're told. And all the men of Israel, says in verse 24, when they saw the man, they fled from him, and they were dreadfully afraid. Verse 25, so the men of Israel said, have you seen this guy who has come up? Surely, surely, he has come up to defy Israel. But they said, there's a great reward. It shall come to pass to the man who deals him, that he will be enriched with great riches. The king will give him his daughter, and his father's house will have to pay no more taxes ever again. Amazing. So all of God's people were filled with fear. That's a fact. They were all intimidated. That's a fact. They were convinced that the giant was in control. That's a fact. The giant was setting the terms. Giants always set the terms. When you've got a giant of your life, when you have a giant of insecurity, insecurity always sets the terms of your life. The giant of insecurity will tell you every morning, you better not even get up, just pull the covers over your head and stay in here all day. You're not going to make any gain on your situation. What's wrong with you? When you've got the giant of disease, disease will rise up and tell you there's nothing you can do against this. I'm going to take your life. Those were all facts. That perception created their reality. If you come back to verse 8, it says, the giant stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, you've come on out to battle. Am I not a Philistine and you're a servant of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let them come down to see me, come down to battle me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, we will all be your servants. But if I prevail and kill him, then you'll be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine says, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we can fight together. Do you hear the intimidation in verses 8, 9, 10, and 11? Giants always work that way. Every giant talks like that. And so what the giant was saying in verses 8, 9, 10, and 11, that created the perception for the children of Israel. Their senses took it in. They saw this guy. They heard what he was saying. This guy was out of our league. He's out of our class. You ever feel like the giant you're facing is in full control? Man, I've been there. That perception has created your reality and has told you there's no escape. So when that giant rises up and says, you better run, you better ignore me, or you better hide, one of the three. Or yet better, you just better give in. What this giant really wanted the children of Israel to do is just surrender without a fight. Oh, that's what the giant always does. Giants are cowards at heart. You ever have a bully at school? Do you ever remember being in school? There was a school bully. He bullied everybody. But finally, there was some little guy in the class, half his size, stood up to him one day and punched the bully in the nose. And when he punched the bully in the nose, the bully began to cry, and the day of his bullying was over. That's kind of what's going on here. So look at the reward to the one that breaks free from the facts. The guy that comes with truth that all of a sudden realizes, wait a minute, you know, I know who we are. We're the children of Israel. We are the people of God. God has spoken to us. First of all, they're going to get great riches. Second of all, I don't know if this is great reward. I never saw the king's daughter, but he says you're going to get the daughters of the king to marry. And third of all, there'll never be any taxes again for your family in the land. You'll be tax-free. So what does David do? David responds to these facts of they're afraid, they're intimidated, the giant is large, the giant is setting the terms of their life. He's creating perception. He's creating their daily life pattern for them. David takes all of those facts and he responds to truth with truth in verse 26. David spoke to the men that stood beside him and said, what shall be done to this man that kills the Philistines and takes away the reproach from Israel? Now here's the truth. David said, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Finally, somebody stood up with truth and confronted fact. Sounds a little bit, doesn't it, like Romans chapter 8 and verse 31. If God be for us, who will be against us? That's truth. All that is against you might be fact. And it probably is. Fact stands strong, fact stands tall, fact wants you to know all of the time that it's in charge. When David said, who is this guy? How dare him stand up against the armies of God? David refused to recognize he was a giant. Refused to recognize the intimidation. He refused to acknowledge the fear of the children of Israel. David did kind of what Joshua and Caleb did when Joshua and Caleb said, look, we're able to do this. The fact is, though, however, David was willing to stand by himself with truth. Eventually, Joshua and Caleb went into the promised land. They were the only ones out of that generation that did. But they didn't have near the strength an assurance of truth that David did. And there's some reasons for that I'll point out. But what David said when he looked at that, and he said to the rest of the guys, who is this dude? Who is this guy that's coming like that? It sounds a little bit like Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We quote those verses all of the time. But when we take those verses that we quote, if God is for us, who can be against us? I can do all things through Christ Jesus. We take those verses and we run them through the filter of fact. And it seems like too many times they evaporate. They lose their punch. All right, write this down. I want you to think about this week. In the face of truth, fact is always powerless. What you need in your life is not the facts. What you need in life is the truth. When you hold truth in your heart, but fact in your head, I can tell you right now, your head will prevail. The mind has got to be transformed. The mind has got to come to a place where it is willing to bend its knee to the truth that has been spoken to you within. Truth is what you get when you enter within yourself, when you begin to look inside. Truth asks one question. This is going to make your life very simple. Truth asks one question. The question that truth asks is simply, it looks within, it says, Father, what is your will? Father, what is your will? I'm working on a personal project right now. I'm disciplining myself to stop and ask at every juncture of the day, Father, what's your will? I want to drive, I remember, I'm going to drive over and get the mail. I run it by, Father, what is it your will? I go get the mail now. That sounds really trite and insignificant, but I'm training my mind that it has to come and submit itself to Father, what is your will? And I have been surprised how many times I get up at the start of the day and I say, okay, I know what my plans are already set for the day. And usually they're based on facts. I have an appointment at this time. I feel like I need to get my hair cut at this time or whatever. You've got it all laid out. Those are the facts of the day. I'm learning now to stop at the start of the day and say, Father, what's your will for this day? What is your plan? What's your will? I never did that before. Sometimes at night I would think about, okay, here's what I need to get done. Usually that's it. That's the key phrase. Here's what I need to get done. There have been times I have dropped what I thought I needed to get done because God's will was a different plan for the day. So there's only one question that you need to have to be able to walk in truth, and that is to go within and say, Father, what is your will? So David reached within. David reached within, and he began to pull up on what the will of the Father is. And in this 26th verse, and let me get back over there, of 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 26, David spoke to the men and he said, what's going to be done to this guy? And David said, what is this guy all about? Why is this? He actually put him down. He said, this uncircumcised Philistine. He refused to recognize the facts. There was something that rose up within David. And David, he saw all the facts. David wasn't ignorant. He could see what was going on. But as the power of truth began to rise up within him, all of the facts begin to diminish. They begin to take a back seat. They begin to come to a place where they really didn't mean anything. Now, let me tell you this. When truth grips your heart, when God speaks a word to you, when God says the land is yours, when God says nothing is impossible to you because of me, when God says you can do all things through Christ, when that truth begins to grip you and you begin to look at the eye of fact that has presented itself, and you look at that fact in the light of truth, and that fact begins to evaporate, it begins to dissipate, you can expect two things to happen. The first thing that you can expect to happen is people that are controlled by appearance-generated facts will vehemently oppose you. Because the giant is driven by facts. So when people have bought into the giant's rhetoric and you come with truth, they will oppose you. And here's David's opposition. Verse 28. Now Eliab, his brother, heard what David spoke. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. He didn't hear the truth that David was bringing up. Eliab was so eaten up with the facts, so intimidated by the giant, that when somebody finally came and began to unmask the truth, began to pull the veil off of the truth and expose the lies of the facts, those that had bought into the lies of the facts began to rebuke the one that brought the truth. You can expect that. And this was his own family. You'd have thought his own family would have said, David, man, let me just encourage you about this. You feel like you got some truth? You know what you're supposed to do? Buddy, we're with you. We're behind you. That's not what happens. Sometimes the truth that you get, that God drops into your spirit, sometimes the greatest opposition will come from those that are closest to you. And if you haven't experienced that opposition from other people that are also Christians and believers, if you haven't experienced their rebuke, I'm going to tell you, probably they haven't gotten a lot of truth. You're probably melted into where they're at with facts. Let's read out here, verse 29. Verse 29. David said, what have I done? David said, isn't there a cause? Isn't there a cause? Here's an insight. Truth usually has to stand in opposition to the facts, but when truth stands in opposition to the facts, it does with a cause that is bigger than self. So David stood up and said, isn't there a cause? Joshua and Caleb in Numbers 13 should have said, isn't there a cause? Isn't there a truth that God has spoken to us about this land that we can go into possess? Yes, it's bigger than us. The fortified cities, the giants, everything, it's bigger than us. David came immediately, and he knew that there was something that was bigger than him, that had gripped his heart, that he had seen truth, that he had gotten a revelation about, and the stronger he stood and the more that he was able to look the facts of fear and intimidation in the face, the smaller they became. Here's what happens. The cause, if you can get a cause bigger than you, it removes the fear of what other people say and the intimidation of the giant. Let's read on, verse 31 and verse 32. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul. See, when you're a guy of truth, when you're a guy of revelation, word will get out, and it will get to the right people. So word got back to Saul the king what David was talking about. And so Saul said, send him over here. So David comes face to face with Saul, and David said, let no man's heart fail because of him. He still didn't recognize the giant. He didn't say the giant. He didn't say the sons of Anak. He said, let no man's heart fear. David said, the fear is a fact. I see it. Don't let it happen. Your servant, I've got truth. I've got revelation on this. I'm standing for a cause that's bigger than me. I will go and do battle with him. I mean, standing for truth gets people's attention. It does. They may oppose you. They may argue with you. But David hit the fact with tried reason. He hit the fact with truth that he had experienced. Now, I want you to think about this for just a moment. Now, verse 33. First, let me read verse 33. Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this guy to fight with him for your youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. Now, what I like about Saul here, is that he didn't come at David angry like David's brothers did. People that are the closest to you, they will fight your truth with anger and bitterness and hatred. His brother Eliab said a lot of unkind things about David. Said, I know the insolence of your heart. I know your pride. This guy's a little shepherd kid out watching a few sheep. Those that are further away, those that have some authority and position, they will look at you and they won't come at you in anger. They will come at you with just the facts. He said, you can't do this, David. You're just a kid, man. This guy's been a warrior since his youth. When you've lived in truth in the past, in the face of facts, living in truth, I hope you catch this. When you get a track record of living in truth as opposed to facts, it becomes a lifestyle. And you can more clearly and accurately voice truth. In David's past, truth had already overcome facts several times. In verse 34, David says, look, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and there was a lion and a bear that came and took a lamb out of the flock. All right, now let's look at this. There was a lion that came and took a lamb out of the flock that David was watching. The fact is, it was a lion and a bear. Fact is, David was even younger than he was then. The fact is, who was David to stand against a lion and a bear? One sheep, one lamb. Fact would say, let the guy have the lamb. Forget it. Let the lamb go. It's not worth risking your life over. It's not worth what you're thinking. Get that thought out of your mind. David knew who he was. So he said there was a lion and a bear. And let's read on. He said, I went out after it. I became aggressive. I struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose up against me, as if it didn't learn its lesson, he said, I took that thing by the beard and I struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine still didn't recognize he was a giant, will be like one of them, seeing that he has defied the armies of the living God. To me, that's an incredible story, but what I pull out of that is the truth that David had walked in previously, and this has been the experience I've had in life. When you're willing to stand for some truth, and the first truth for me was the fatherhood of God, how much God is a father, and that as a father, it defines him. And people resisted that, and grace came after that. People left the church, and it was rough. But once I got by the lion and the bear, then all of a sudden this uncircumcised Philistine, when you get more truth, it becomes a lifestyle. You can walk in it more easily. The first time or two, it's really difficult. It's hard. So the first thing that you need to know when you begin to get truth is that people that are controlled by appearance-generated facts will vehemently oppose you. Second thing you need to know is that people may respond with a mixture of reason and facts, which is what Saul was doing. Saul heard the story of the lion and the bear. He still didn't get the picture that David was a man of truth that had experience. He knew what he was doing. So finally he says, look, David, I'm going to put my clothes on you. This is reasonable, right? This is reasonable. So Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head, clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened the sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tried this thing before and tested him. And David said to Saul, I can't walk with these. I haven't tried this before. So David took them off. All right, the point is this. Saul said, look, at least let's be reasonable. People that are still walking in fact, even if they don't vehemently oppose you, they will mix reason with facts to try to help you. I think it was a wonderful thing that Saul said, let me just try to help you a little bit with this. And he tried him in the natural to do something that was going to be a supernatural act. You can't mix the message when you're given the truth. David's lesson is you have to use what's been put in your hand. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 24, you have to use what's been put in your hand, knowing that what has been put in your hand is more than enough. That God is the one that has put in your hand what He has put in your hand. 1 Thessalonians 5:24 says, He that called you is faithful, who also will do it. I could take that verse of Scripture and bring it back and put it on the life of David and know that the one that called David, the one that said, I'm putting truth in your heart, I want you to be the guy that goes and confronts the Philistine. I've prepared you with a lion. I've prepared you with a bear. You know how to walk in truth. You know how to deny facts. You know how to stand for me. Who is this guy that is defying the truth with fact? I want you to go and I want you to annihilate it. Now, fact isn't done yet. The giant isn't done yet. In verse 40, let's go back to our story. 1 Samuel chapter 17. The giant isn't done yet. He hasn't given up, even though he knows his kid's preparing. Verse 40, it says this. So David took staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, put them in the shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. All right? Now, David did 3 things. There's been messages made out of the 5 stones. I think that it's been called fivefold ministry, 5 stones. I don't know about all that, because I think the reality of the situation is if David didn't get him with the first stone, he would not have time to put the second stone in. The giant would have been all over him by that time. I think he just picked up, happened to be 5 stones, put them in the pouch. Now, if you want to make a big sermon out of that, that's fine. But there's 3 things that I noticed that David did. David just rested in what God told him to do. He trusted God. And he believed that the God that had delivered him from the lion and the bear could deliver him from the hand of the Philistine, from the giant. So when you're confronted, the first thing you need to do is learn how to rest, to trust, and believe. 3 things that rose up within David, put him in a position of rest. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't uptight, he wasn't angry, he wasn't all emotional, he rested. Then he trusted, and then he believed. Man, when you're facing a giant, learn to rest, trust, and believe. Because intimidation is about to turn up the dial. Intimidation, the giant that you're facing, is about to turn up the dial. He's about to go face to face. Verse 41. Verse 41. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went with him and went before him. And when the Philistine looked about him and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only youth. He was ruddy. He was a good-looking kid. 43. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog? You come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Boy, this is a confrontation of 2 systems. This is a confrontation of truth and fact. Verse 44, the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I'm going to give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." See, at some point, it's going to be just you and the giant in a face-off. At some point, you're going to have to face the giant by yourself. His brothers, the armies, they were all back. They were watching. Saul was watching. There comes a time that when you confront the giant, when you confront the facts, what the doctor said, what the banker said, what the owner of your company said, what the bully said, that you have to confront it by yourself, and the intimidation the giant turns up is to reinforce that you don't have a chance. You don't have a chance in hell with me, buddy. I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds of the air. So now truth stands back and truth responds to the facts. In verse 45, David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, with a javelin. You come to me with all of the facts." He said, "I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." You come to me with the facts. I'm coming to you with truth. I'm coming to you with truth himself. And he goes on and he says, "This day," watch, "this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand." Didn't say I'm going to do it. The giant said, "I will destroy you." David never said, "I will take you out." He said, "This day the Lord will deliver you." When you have truth running for you, if God is for us, who can be against us, right? "I'll strike you, I'll take your head off, and this day I'll give your carcass to the camp of the Philistines, to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with facts, sword and spear, for the battle is the truth's, it is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands." So truth gives assurance that you know, that you know, that you know. And man, all I can tell you is this: when truth grips your heart, there comes something over you that is stronger than anything else, and you'll know that you know that you know in the truth that he is Jehovah Rapha, the healer. And the facts are, you've got the disease, you've got the sickness, you've got the malady, whatever it is. The more that truth grips you, the more those facts have to melt, and you know that you know that you know. The whole world is looking right now for the sons of truth to manifest, those sons that are able to stand in opposition to the facts that religion and the world can draw. All right, back to the story. Let me quit preaching here. We're just about done. We're just out of time. Let me just finish this up. Verse 48, you know the story. What happens then? Intimidation has turned the dial completely up. Truth says, it's not going to be that way. The Lord's going to deliver you into my hands. David puts his hand in his bag. Verse 49, takes out a stone, slung it, and it struck the Philistine in the forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. I don't think he was dead. I think he was knocked out. First thing that you need to do against fact is knock it out before you take it out. You deal the blow against it. Now here's when I think truth finally died, or fact finally died. Verse 49, he sank to the earth. Verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and sword, and he struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. David ran, stood over the Philistine, took the sword and drew it out of the sheath and killed him. He killed him with his own weapon. You see, fact will eventually kill itself. It will change. He took the sword out of the sheath and killed him and cut his head off. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Truth prevailed, and it left no room for doubt. It severed the head of the fact. It severed the head of the giant. The thing that's standing against you, truth will cut its head off if you will let it. Verse 52. Then verse 53, then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. See, other people will follow you once you blaze the trail. We're blazing some trails right now. Truth is blazing some trails. People are standing back and they're watching the battle that's going on with grace and law and religion and the reformation that's taking place. But I'm telling you, as the tipping point goes, people will begin to follow in masses. Verse 53, then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. Truth always has a reward beyond expectation. Yes, they plundered the tents. They got some stuff. But when you're the trendsetter with truth, you're the guy that gets the great riches, you marry the king's daughter, and you don't pay more taxes. You got it? You hit the big reward because you stood for truth against the facts. All right, now let's just summarize for just a minute. For the last 2 weeks, we have seen giants fought in two different ways. We've seen giants fought with facts in Numbers chapter 13, and the result of taking a giant on with the same dimension or in the same realm that giant stands in, which is fact, produces no result, no promised land. The people remained as grasshoppers in their own eyes. They had no future, they had no hope. When you fight with truth like David did in 1 Samuel chapter 17, what comes is freedom, riches, and a bright future. So what makes the difference? What makes the difference is which tree you eat from. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the tree of fact. It's based on observation. It's based on reason and logic and experience. The tree of life is based on God's plan, God's will, and what God speaks to you. Back to that prayer in John chapter 17, verse 17, when Jesus said, "Thy word is truth." He wasn't talking about the Bible. He was talking about the word that God speaks to you. That's the aletheia. That is the unbendable, absolute truth you can take to the bank, done deal, unbendable, and it will come to pass. So how do you get that? You go within, you go to the tree of life within, and you ask one question: Father, what's your will? And then you shut up. Some of you pray so much and all you do is talk. Talk, 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 talk. You need to shut up and let God speak. That's really what prayer is. Prayer is letting God talk while you're silent. So when you come to the tree of life, you ask one question. Now I want you to start asking it before you drive to the store. Father, is this your will that I go this way? How about this way? Which way do I go? What's your will? I know it sounds small and trite, but it will develop you into a person, and it will renew your mind and make your mind begin to submit to what the plan and the will of God is. See, what truth has done, it's awakened you to the realization of the presence of the Christ that is within you, that has always been within you. And there were probably years and years of your life you didn't recognize that Christ was within, because the facts of religion told you He wasn't, and the facts of religion intimidated you with your worthlessness and your unrighteousness, that you could never have the Christ within. But now you've got the revelation of it, and you've got to decide whether you're going to stand for truth or you're going to stay with the facts. That Christ within is your total resource. Truth looks inward and it asks. Fact looks outward and makes a conclusion. If you're going to defeat the giants of your life, I would suggest that even while there's no battle, you begin to work from truth and not from fact. All right, now last week on this little series, I want to give you 5 signposts on the journey from being led from fact to truth. You're going to have some check-off points in your life as you see your life begin to switch and turn, where no longer are you persuaded by facts, but you're led by truth in all of life's battles. So that whenever any giant arises against you, you're able to take the truth and bring it to the ground. All right? So you should come back to these 2 YouTube teachings and get ready for number 3 next week. We'll bring it all to a conclusion. Thank you for being with me this morning today. Hope your Sunday is as beautiful in your city as it is here. I'll see you back next Sunday morning. We'll look at some deeper, more revealing truth. Wednesday night, we will take the story of David and fighting giants with truth. We'll take it down a level. So join me Wednesday night, 8 o'clock on my Facebook page, and we'll go through a few things together. And if you can't do that, we'll see you back next Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, right here as the Digital Cathedral gathers. Tell your friends about it. Bring a friend to the cathedral next week. God bless. We'll see you next time.